The last speaker that we've got is Ken Banks, the author of The Reluctant Innovator. Ken also has been personally involved in getting some humanitarian innovations off the ground. And I think this is a nice conclusion to the panel to have somebody talk about the psychology of innovation. Ken, over to you.
Thank you. My slides are cut in half right now. Are they going to correct, do you think, before I...
Slides are cut in half.
For me? Maybe Laura can... Laura's magic. It's a reluctant presentation, yeah. Absolutely. I think it's probably...
Very good. That's getting close.
It usually just works. There we go. Thank you, Laura. So it's good to be here. Thanks to the organisers for the invitation. Laura said she was angry a bit earlier. I'm angry and frustrated, I guess you could say. And you'll find out a little bit why in the next 10 minutes. It'll be a very, very quick 10 minutes. I want to go through quite a few things, but I think it's important that the message gets said. Before I start, I want to start off with a question. So what do the following things have in common? Post-it notes, chocolate chip cookies, tea bags, microwave ovens, paracetamol, Teflon, crowdsourcing, same language subtitling, and solar power for maternity wards. There's a prize of a copy of my amazing book for the correct answer. Just shout out. Anyone got any idea? What those things got in common?
They weren't designed for that.
They weren't designed for that.
Or whatever they turned out to be, they were accidents.
That'll do. Congratulations. They were. They were basically not ever really, they were never intended. They're the byproduct of someone trying to do something else. Nobody set out to make the chocolate chip cookie, but they made it. And thank goodness they did, I hear you all say. But I think luck is probably the wrong word to use, because it wasn't luck that these people were actually doing what they were doing. The fact that they produced something they didn't intend to produce is still very interesting in itself. And I think it also teaches us things when we think about innovation and development, about how that comes about. We'll step back 3 in those slides. This is going to be a 20-second history of 3 projects. So Ushahidi, who most of you probably know about, this is Eric Hirschman, very good friend of mine, him and some friends, Kenyan election crisis, things got nasty, people started dying, nobody reporting news that they felt needed to be reported, and no one mapping where that news was coming from. They felt that was needed in order to have a meaningful peace process later and to figure out what had happened. Built a map in 3 days, no money, no mandate, no plan, nothing. They just built it. I think it's quite interesting when you think about the role that plays today, that it didn't have any of the things that we kind of think projects need to have in place before you start to do something. Bridge Cathari, friend of mine, watching Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, which apparently is a good film. I don't know who's watched it. Anyone?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So Bridge watching this film in a flat in New York with his friends, eating pizza. He was learning Spanish at the time. He said to his friends, hey, you know, the audio's in English. The audio's in Spanish and the subtitles are in English, and I'd like to actually be able to read the Spanish as I hear the Spanish, because it will help me learn Spanish. Why don't we have in India Bollywood films and Bollywood musicals and so on to show the Hindi words on the screen as the Hindi is sung and spoken, and kids can learn to read that way. Devised same language subtitling. 300 million school children today have their first taste of literacy and reading through this project. Pizza, DVD, no money, no mandate, no plan. A bit of a theme developing here, right? This is Laura Stachel, a good friend of mine. Laura's a pediatrician in the US, is usually part of the very happy birth process. Most women that she cared for had a good birth and everything was fine. She went to Nigeria and she found that in many wards there was no light. This is basically a maternity ward. Around that picture, around that desk is about 30 odd women with babies. You can't see them because there's just no way of actually powering the ward. Now, if somebody comes in at 3 a.m. with severe problems after spending a day walking to the hospital and they need to operate, they can't operate. Women were dying because there was no light, and it really, really bugged her. She could not believe that this problem existed in the 21st century. She was never expecting to see a problem like that. So her and her husband, boyfriend, I think, whatever he was, built this solar suitcase. You put it out in the daytime, it charges up batteries, you bring it in at night, a woman comes in at 3 a.m., she needs help, you can operate. Right? When she found out about this problem, no money, no mandate, no plan, just did it, right? She saw it and she did it. And what I think is interesting about all these stories is there's lots of them. but we don't always hear about them. And that's why I'm going to shamelessly plug my book here, because what I found fascinating was that this stuff was happening. And it didn't have all the things that you're supposed to have, the 5-year plan, the mission statements, the budgeting, everything in place that business school teaches you to do, and the development sector almost thrives on. No log frames in sight. My goodness. And, I hate log frames, as Laura will well testify. And the reason I think this matters is because aid has got problems. Now, these are some of the problems that are always directed at aid. We may not agree with them, but, the one that aid is wasted, large amounts of money don't get to the people it needs to, and it pays for overpriced services and consultants, and stuff gets flown in, and most of the money gets spent in the country where the money was given rather than the place where it was intended. Again, money not going down to the people who really, really need it, just disappearing before it gets anywhere near them. Protectionism and market access, the way that international markets work against, say, African farmers. You can throw all the aid at them you like, but if they can't sell their products on international markets because there are trade agreements to stop them, then you're kind of stuck, right? You're helping with one hand and you're reducing with the other. So that's a big issue as well. And, a lot of projects fail because of corruption, and there's a general belief that the huge amounts of money given to governments encourages and gives opportunity for corruption and embezzlement. We create an environment where that's possible and where it happens. And I was quite stunned when I found this figure of $3 trillion over 60 years. I mean, I don't know how many zeros 3 trillion is. Is it 3 billion? A trillion? It's a lot of money, right? Have we got $3 trillion of value over 60 years? I don't know. Maybe we have. I probably think we probably haven't. But there's a lot of negativity around that. People are kind of dubious. They're skeptical. Yet, we're constantly trying to get more money for things. And maybe if it's not working, we shouldn't be asking for more money, but thinking more about what value we get for spending that money. And the whole discussion in the UK around the ODA budget and so on, it's always about the number. It's about the percentage and number, not what we're doing with it. And that's a really, really big problem. And these debates go on online hugely. Bill Easterly, Jeffrey Sachs, very entertaining, always having a ding-dong, shouting and screaming at each other, pulling out each other's hair. It's kind of fun. And Bill Easterly, no money, no aid, let people get on with it. We're actually creating an environment where bad things are going to happen, and we're never going to fix global poverty with aid. Jeffrey Sachs wants more money, more aid, and so they couldn't be more opposite. And then kind of in the middle, we have people like Paul Polak, who are pushing forward a view that business will solve poverty. The only way we're actually going to fix these problems is to create business solutions where we provide things to people who are willing to pay for them. That way we know they want them, and we know actually we're building things that are useful to them. If you give stuff away, of course they're going to take it. It's pretty obvious, right? With Frontline SMS, I think, as Laura said already, we've kind of proven over the years with the product that if you trust people, if you're respectful in the way you do work and you give people the tools, they can actually do pretty good stuff. But that's not kind of how it's been. And I totally share Laura's kind of anger in this, in a sense that tools like this exist, but they're just not getting into the hands of enough people who can make use of them, even though we've proven over, at least for this project, for almost 10 years now, that actually these things can happen. So the way I kind of see it, when I look at all these things going on, I find that the sort of traditional development sector just spends a lot of time talking and thinking and strategizing and writing and just figuring it all out and doing theories of change and log frames and SWOT analyses. But the people who own the problems, the people who actually face the problems day by day, they just get on with it. They just fix it. They just see things, they're broken, and they fix them. There's a lesson in there, I think, a lesson that we really need to take something from. And when we think about the tech sector, where I particularly spent most of my time, we're obsessed with fast, small, high-powered, all this kind of fancy, really high innovation stuff, iPhones, all that kind of stuff, things that come from the mecca of innovation, the Apple Store. We get really, really excited by it, and we get so excited that we get these kind of crazy ideas. How African farmers can use iPads. I mean, come on, I don't know how many of you have seen an African farmer with an iPad. There probably will never be that many. Why are we talking about this? Because it's cool and somebody will fund it. And that's crazy, right? People fund stuff because it's cool, not because it works. And this, for me, is the greatest example of innovation for innovation's sake. It's an iPad-powered coffee machine. Why on earth? What was the problem statement here? What were they trying to fix when they built this? This exists because it can exist. And it's an extreme version of the kind of stuff we often see happen in development, and particularly in technology development. We just build stuff because it's cool and exciting, and it's a nice challenge for us to have, but it doesn't really address what the real problems are. And part of the real problem is that we're building for these kind of phones. We're building for smart stuff. We're building for 3G, 4G, 5G, Wi-Fi, apps. But people still kind of have these older phones. They still, in very, very large numbers, have phones that only do voice and SMS. And for quite a long time, this will still be the case. So we need to kind of have a reality check. The reason people don't like those phones on the right is because they are harder to build solutions for. So people kind of ignore the fact that there aren't that many of the smart ones and build for the smart ones anyway. And that's clearly self-interest and just not the right thing to do. And then they jump on planes and they take them to people and they give them to people and they expect communities just to use them, or when they can't use them, it's the community's fault for not being engaged, or it's their fault for not having a smartphone. It's kind of all a little bit crazy. But when we do finally sometimes find something that works, then we kind of turn our backs on it a little bit. I think the future of development and tech in development really is it's local innovators, it's local problem solvers, it's people who own the problems they're trying to solve because they have a more vested interest in fixing it. That's not to say people from the outside can't fix problems, but it's a different way of viewing things. We need to recognize that more and more people in developing countries have the ability, have the technologies to fix their own problems and start to foster an environment where we can work with them, not ignore them, because a lot of the ICT for development community still ignoring local empowerment because it doesn't suit them to have people in those countries to be able to work without them. The problem is that they will become extinct, of course. And that is part of the problem. This is my last slide. In conservation, there is some evidence that direct payments to communities to not go into national parks, to not eat the things inside, to not cut down the trees, actually works. If you take the 5 million, don't pay for guards and rangers and guns and drones and all this kind of fancy stuff. Just give everybody around the park $10 a month and just tell them not to go and eat stuff. Right? There's some proof that that works. The problem, of course, is that if that works for all conservation areas, then what do you do with 25,000 conservation NGOs? They're not needed anymore. So we don't do this, right? So I'll leave you with one question, just to go with the other questions earlier. As an NGO, what's your exit strategy? Thank you.
Wow, Ken, thank you. That was great. Great energy, and we've got just a couple minutes left, and I want to try and keep the energy going. A panel, Laura, have a seat back there, because we have 7 amazing speakers and so little time to hear from them. I'm going to invite them at the end of our session. In about 12 minutes or so, I'm going to invite you all to give one concluding thought to the group. So prepare yourselves, panel. In the meantime, you guys, what are you feeling right now? Throw some words. Just shout them out. What are you feeling? Excited. Another word. Another one. Overwhelmed. Another one. Inspired. Hopeful.
Aspiration meeting reality. Or the challenge of aspiration meeting reality.
Aspiration, challenge, reality. Meeting reality.
The challenge of the aspiration meeting reality.
Martin, I was trying to turn your 3 words into 1 word, but that's okay. Another word. What are you feeling right now? What are you thinking right now? What are you thinking right now? Not feeling, thinking.
Great ideas which can be operational.
Okay, someone else. What are you thinking? Shout it out.
The power of innovation.
Power of innovation. Somebody else. What are you thinking right now?
Just how to put it into practice.
How to put it into practice.
A little bit confused.
A couple of things that seem to cut across a lot of those. One is this.
Okay, hang on, Jez. We need a microphone. We're going to move from words now into sentences. If you're speaking sentences, you got to have a microphone. And then, Mike, we can come to you if you want to explain a bit more what you mean by confused. Go ahead, Jez.
Okay, just a couple of themes that seem to run across all the kind of things people have said. One is this whole idea around empowerment, collective intelligence, distributed knowledge, and enabling tools which pick up on that and focus it and channel the energies. And the second thing is, I suppose the exit strategy issue is this idea of incentive systems that, I mean, currently I've been working on healthcare, and this seems to be a very similar model, that you're paid to treat ill people, and therefore the more ill people, the more you benefit. So there isn't an incentive to keep people healthy. Until you change the incentive system, you get different outcomes. And one of the models we looked at in Spain is where the payment system isn't based on activity. It's not based on the more people you treat, the more you get. There's a fixed amount you're paid per inhabitant in a local area. And therefore, because you've got a fixed amount, you now want to keep people healthy. Because ill people are now costing you more. Therefore, is there a way of transferring that model into a financing model for NGOs?
Right. Excellent. Thank you. It's about incentives. Business models is about incentives, isn't it? Mike?
Wasn't expecting this, Sean. I guess I'm a little bit confused, partly because so much in such a short time, partly because this isn't what I do. Does it matter that it's not what I do, providing other people are doing it? And just because I suppose it is challenging me to think on my feet, and I like to do that in a space I'm comfortable with, and this is I'm not I looked really nostalgically at the Nokia phone, the old phone, instead of thinking, gosh, how horrible and old-fashioned. I thought, oh yes, they're nice, aren't they?
Fantastic. Other reflections? Thank you. Reflections on what you've heard. Two here, Mark, and then Catherine, and then Sonia.
A quick reflection. This is exciting and inspiring, and therefore innovative. Innovation, obviously, is risk. How do we overcome organizational or institutional barriers to taking that risk? And then a reflection that perhaps the Start Network is that more neutral space, that safer space for the members of it to actually take that risk.
Interesting. Pass the microphone behind you to Catherine Stick. Thanks, Mark.
I'm just wondering, are we using technology enough? Because I'm not a very great innovation person. I'm rather skeptic. And here it looks for me like with technology and rather little effort, you can do a lot of new things. And that, I think, impresses me. And I'm wondering if all of you, many of you, do it partly voluntary, because what I'm missing a little bit is where is the money and the driving force to get these products out? I would be quite interested to hear something from the panel about that. Thank you.
Great question. Sonia, at the just behind, and then microphone here as well, next.
I think
Go ahead, Sonia.
What really struck me about what you just, the last week you just said and inspired me was this point about, we're all spending months thinking of theories of change and log frames. Well, on the ground, people are actually making change happen. And that really struck a chord for me. And I think we really need to think harder about how we can be much more flexible, adaptable in our complicated processes to make us be able to make change happen faster too.
Great. John?
One of the things that strikes me is that these innovations take place outside of the established organizations, and then they create their own organizations. I guess looking at that in one way, it's a threat to the existing organizations. It makes me feel uncomfortable because it's part of the humanitarian sector becoming so diffuse. It's moved from dozens of organizations to hundreds of organizations, and this technical innovation and organizations forming around new technologies leaves me feeling very uncomfortable. But there's something here about how the established organizations embrace new technologies. And just this morning, I discovered there was an organization called HoverAid Madagascar, which takes the sort of 30, 40-year-old technology of hovercraft to improve medical service provision in Madagascar in areas that are partially flooded. And I thought, well, why didn't an existing established organization take hovercraft and have that idea 10 or 20 years ago to provide services? Why does it take a new organization to set itself up in competition with established organizations to actually implement that innovation. And I don't know, it leaves me with a question about innovation and the sector, and innovation as being creative, but also innovation as being somehow destructive.
Fantastic reflection. I think let's play with this idea for a minute, because I think this is really important. A couple people have expressed feelings of anxiety, if you like, about what's been proposed today, and the potential from new ways of working, and what that means for the incumbents. And we began with Rose, who drew a parallel to Kodak. You know, we are Kodak before Kodak closed. So we don't really have a luxury of reflecting on this, I don't think. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I have a huge number of thoughts going through my head. I think broadly, one thing that's worth remembering is not every industry gets disrupted in the same way. So Kodak gets destroyed, but the disruption that was supposed to be coming, for example, to the book publishing industry has not turned out the way that people thought it was. Publishing houses have not collapsed. They're not going to collapse. It's all coming through quite nicely. I like competition in the sector. I like the multiplication of organizations. I think it's a healthy thing. I think competition has a kind of a bad rap in the humanitarian development sector. People are traditionally quite afraid of it, but it can be a very healthy force. The point I would make against, or not against, a cautionary point I would make against what we've heard today, prefacing this, saying all of these projects are great. I think they're fantastic. I think we've got a lot to learn from them. Politics is the question, not the politics within the project, such as Avaz has, but the question about what these models mean in terms of how they affect the people that we work with. So, for example, I'm a big supporter, have been, of OpenStreetMap for a long time. I like the fact that it disrupts the monopoly of power over spatial data. I think that's fantastic, because spatial data traditionally, maps are traditionally a military government tool for controlling people. And by doing what OpenStreetMap does, you give people who never had control before control over their environment to a certain extent. Having said that, maps are a particular way of looking at the world. And the way in which OpenStreetMap is formulated is a particular way of looking at the world. So what we're doing at the same time as potentially liberating people is putting a certain way of thinking, of operating, of working onto them. So there's these political questions around the disruption that are more interesting for me, well, as interesting for me as the business model questions. So that's a flag I think is interesting. And it's the same is true of all of them in different ways. And so I think when we come to the humanitarian sector, we also have to think about that as well, because the politics of humanitarianism is often overlooked, and we have a responsibility not to overlook it.
Great, thanks, Paul. Who else wants to talk? I see Karsten and Martin and David and Arun and Francis and Russ. Okay, we've got 5 minutes, so keep them short, please, and everybody will speak.
I try to keep it very short. I'm similar to Paul. A lot of things buzz through my head as a result of it, and I think I spent the last 3 years in a lot of soul-searching exercises of all kinds of organizations and initiatives in the humanitarian sector, discussing how the world is changing, how they need to change, and not just the business models, their structures, and so on and so forth. And one common theme is very clearly is the world gets more connected, organizations need to be better connected, they need to see themselves much more as connectors from local to global, horizontal, vertical, 3-, 4-dimensional connectors. I don't think that is seen enough. Technology can help with that. The other thing that comes to my mind when I hear all of that is somebody said, yeah, look, Avaz, something like that used for the wrong purpose could cause a lot of damage. And that's also true, and I think that's why it's very important with all these initiatives and all the new organizations and all of that, that we go back to the concept of values and principles that underpin humanitarian work and how they play out in the context of innovations and new practices and new approaches, so that we have this small common denominator that we all agree upon what humanitarianism is all about.
Thanks, Karsten. Francis next, and then Arun, then Arun. Francis?
Fantastic ideas, really, really interesting. But dare I say it, that maybe the selection of the panel is a bit of a bias. You've chosen people who are doing fantastically interesting things. Any one of us could probably come up with a panel of people who could describe fantastic innovations that are being done by NGOs, by Start Network members. ACF could tell us about Plumpy Nut, MSF could tell us about inflatable hospitals. There are any number of us who are innovating and putting innovative practices in place for the benefit of people affected by humanitarian crises. So, and the other point I wanted to raise is, so all these new ideas came up, and the onus is on. The accusation is that NGOs are being somehow protectionist by not adopting these ideas. Why did you all have to go and start your own companies because we were somehow excluding you? Well, maybe it's the other way round, actually. Maybe you were being protectionist about your ideas, and actually you should have come to us. I mean, it takes two to tango, doesn't it? And I'm saying it's not a black and white picture.
Great, thanks, Francis. Arun is next, and then Russ, right here. Arun.
Yeah, some of the best innovations in the world are the ones that are accessible. Why the iBooks and sort of internet books haven't closed down the publishing houses is because for thousands of years people have access to the written word. The mobile phone, the old Nokia mobile phone that was on one of the slides, because people can buy it, they can afford it, they can access it. That's what we need to be working about. I sometimes feel, having lived in this country for the last nearly 25 years, we live in a bubble. We sort of think, you sit in this room, you've got internet, you've got mobile phones, I've got an iPhone, which I think is great, but it's such a limiter for me. When I go to Kenya or to India or to Zimbabwe, the limitation that it puts on me the moment I'm out of the capital city, and that's when I recognize that for people there, we need solutions, we need innovations that work for them, not that work for us sitting here. I think we need to really think about that.
Great, thank you. Russ, and then David, right here, David Hockaday. Go ahead, Russ.
The people we have up on the panel are people who've succeeded in bringing new ideas to the fore. But we shouldn't forget that 90% of startups fail in the first year and a further 80% of the survivors fail in year 2. If you want to invest in innovation, it is inherently a highly risky business. And particularly for the older NGOs, it is a difficult position to take to say, yeah, I'm going to gamble that I can pick the winning innovations. There's risk aversion, systemic risk aversion. There's driven by fear as much as anything else. There's fear of trustees, fear of donors, fear of the charity commission. So if you want to instill more and more innovation of the type we see over there, you need to get over that. And there are a few ways of doing that, but you either need to stand up and boldly say, we want this risk, we think it is desirable, and we trust that we're going to get something out at the end of it, or you need to find a way of passing on that risk to someone else.
Thank you, Russ. David Hockaday, and then Martin up here. David.
Thanks, incredibly inspiring, all presentations. Thank you so much. I feel really energized. I'm increasingly convinced now, if I wasn't before, that fiduciary is one of our biggest challenges right now as a sector, not just within the humanitarian architecture, financing architecture as it exists, but perhaps also within our own organizations.
Martin. And then panel, get ready.
Thinking 3 words, which are habits and discomfort from the contribution was made there, and stamina. Because it seems to me that this is fundamentally about changing both our individual habits, but also organizational habits. And that is just inherently incredibly difficult. So therefore, inevitably, there's a discomfort. And I'm only an occasional visitor to this sector, but I think there is a general principle here of the challenge of that. So the challenge really is, are we individually, in whatever sector we're in, up to really confronting our own habits living with the discomfort and then knowing that it's going to require significant determination and time and indeed stamina, which I think the START network has amply demonstrated. So I think it's a personal challenge.
Thank you. Panel, last thoughts, just 30 seconds each. Let's go in reverse order. Ken, please.
Oh, wow, okay. Really quick responses to those things. I think innovation doesn't need money, not in the wild, doesn't need investing in it, needs being given a chance. So money isn't the problem at all. Money actually kills innovation, I think. The fear of failing, absolutely. The way that the aid sector is set up, it's the Daily Mail, get your story, and you're in big trouble. Eric always asks, actually, why the Red Cross didn't build Ushahidi. They should have done. The Red Cross needed something like Ushahidi, probably many times in the past. Why didn't they build it? You know, so he always raises that, just talking about why bigger NGOs don't build stuff. I think people taking their ideas to bigger NGOs would absolutely kill them. It would kill the innovator. It would drive them to despair, probably alcohol, and the idea would completely fall apart because big NGOs just are not built in ways. You'd have to do a 5-year plan. You'd have to justify it all. You'd have to do all the things, the log frames and all the nasty stuff, which people often don't know about when they start. I don't think it's a competition. They might be competitors, but I don't think it's a competition. If someone can build a tool that does a job better for disenfranchised communities, then good on them. Because it's all about the communities. It's not about trying to keep big NGOs nice and happy. And I think disruption comes from unexpected places. The wristwatch industry never expected the mobile phone to be a threat, but more people now don't wear a wristwatch because they have a phone.
You can count me in that group. Sean framed it up that I'm here supporting insurance solutions. I want to point something out. Insurance is not working for natural disasters in the South. So the business model that we're talking about is actually trying to insert ourselves into a very failed system. There's a lot of market failure problems associated with finding insurance solutions for disasters in the Southern Hemisphere. So we're not really the insurance sector. I'm not an insurance guy, I'm an academic. I've identified market failure problems and trying to address an innovation, and really the core aspect of our value proposition, the reason I think DFID is keenly interested in what we're doing is because I've been making the argument that there's a tremendous amount of innovation in the North to deal with disaster risk that hasn't made its way to the South yet. And part of it is the science that I'm emphasizing for you. And part of it is the financial innovation that's occurred in creative solutions like catastrophe bonds, where you actually put capital at risk from pension funds for natural disasters. We can do things like that in this community in ways you guys have never imagined. And we can accelerate the pace of those innovations that have changed the risk transfer of natural disasters in the North in a way that you haven't thought about yet. That's the vision that I have. That's what I'm trying to do here, is be an impetus for change in a very traditional insurance market with capital base, with science, and with financial engineering that I'm seeing happen in the North and accelerating the process so this happens in the South. I'd love to see the humanitarian sector be part of that activity. I think that we haven't even touched the surface in terms of what can happen and how it can be more affordable, because that's the key part of our business model, is to make it more affordable with scientific information so that we can price as keenly as possible from day one.
Great.
I was a bit surprised, I suppose, to hear that people feel uncomfortable with what they've heard this evening, or feeling of discomfort with, I guess, this relationship between large NGOs and these new young whippersnappers that have popped up everywhere. But that hasn't been my experience, actually, with the interactions that we've been in HOT. As I tried to explain in the last few slides there, the interaction actually has been that we'll talk to a larger organisation like MSF or AusAid, have given us a lot of funding. So we use that relationship as a funding source, but also we're feeding our innovation into those larger organisations, essentially. And the interaction has been wonderful. It hasn't been uncomfortable to try and introduce our new ideas to them. And yeah, I think that can be a way forward, actually, for possibly for all of the organisations that have presented today, is that we can interact with these larger organisations and supply our innovation to them.
Thank you. So I just want to say, if anyone was planning to give Ken any money this evening and is now not going to, I'm leaving our bank details here. They're just here. So I just wanted to give you a story and a suggestion, a thought experiment. The story is that I am ex-Red Cross also. I used to be with the Brits. And we, at one point, were partnering with national societies in Africa and organised a capacity building workshop. And they all came over and we rolled out our very lovely food security advisor, resilience advisor, livelihoods, health, da-da-da, accountability, and said, so, what do you want to learn about? And they said, actually, we really like your shops. Can you bring us one of the people who can tell us about your fundraising shops? Because we think they're brilliant. So us as a room full of people who've chosen to work in humanitarian aid and development, what we think is innovative and exciting is not necessarily going to be the thing that somebody else is going to go, yes, that will really help me do my job. And the thought experiment is this. The next time someone uses Doodle to get you to corral 6 cats, aka humanitarian aid workers, into one meeting at one place at one time, the next time somebody uses a voting system to get your views on something, the next time someone uses a log frame at work and says, actually, this is a really good way to identify what we're really shooting for here and whether we're anywhere close to getting to it. Think to yourself, does my local partner, and bearing in mind here that you actually are just their fundraising and comms partner, let's be real, does my local partner have access to this? And if not, how can we get them something that does this for them in the context that they work in? Because this is what helps me to get through the day and get the job done that I need to do before I can go home. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about that. So.
I am speechless now. One thought, one point of information and then one reflection. About 80-90% of the campaigns you've seen here, without the expertise, the hard work, the experience, the skills, and the patience of NGOs wouldn't have been possible. I mean, the fact that the intelligence, the analysis, the contacts very often is coming through organizations like yours, so that is very valuable. Having said that, going back to the issue of politics and something that I've heard a couple of times, or more than that in the last couple of days, the promise of the START network of transforming the humanitarian sector to make it better, bringing more justice, saving more lives, basically kind of closing the gap between that world we have and the world we dream to have, is not going to happen unless you and us together ensure that citizens go in this journey with you. I think that at the end of the day, you see across the world this like bubbling, sometimes explosive sense of democracy is on the march. People are beginning to realize that not only in terms of technology we have to innovate in terms of democracy, to find many different ways of engaging with technology or without technology, to try to change the system. It's not working for people. And somehow there is a big pushback from governments and big corporations taking big chunks of the public space. So I think that my feeling is that we only be able to transform the humanitarian sector if we manage together and the humanitarian sector becomes part of that battle for democracy and for justice. And if we do that, there is a hope that the sector will change. Otherwise, I think that we are doomed.
I'm not sure how to follow that. So I think I'll end not with answers, but with questions. And there's just 3 questions that can be applied to any programs that people might be working on. The kinds of questions I found useful anyway. Which is, firstly, what is the core problem that I'm trying to solve? Secondly, who in the world could be best placed to solve that problem? And thirdly, how can I innovate to structure engaging opportunities for them to do just that?
The discomfort, I think, is very positive, and I think we should focus on
people in the panel are very worried about the level of discomfort. I think it's great because discomfort helps us address inertia. And in START, over the last 4 years, Sean will be testament to the fact that we've had a huge amount of discomfort because we're trying to do something different. And only if you have that discomfort can you bring about change. So I think we should embrace the discomfort and we should use it in a positive way to embrace the change that is going to happen. And we really need to focus on that.
Well, that was fantastic. I thought we were just going to have some really interesting speakers. They are all interesting and talented. I thought we'd get a couple of ideas, but actually this turned into a bigger conversation than I was expecting. And I'm thrilled. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you.